Hello, this is Elder Tehila Firewind, and you're watching Wicca 101 Abridged. Hail and welcome. The topic this time is on the Threefold Law, which essentially is Wicca's version of karma. When we talk about this, keep in mind that there are a lot of different perspectives. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret this, and we're just going to talk about a bunch of different ones and leave the interpreting of which one is the right one up to you. So, the Threefold Law comes from the Wiccan Rede, which was originally published in a magazine called Earth Religion News in 1974, and then it was republished in the Green Egg magazine, which is a really common, well-known pagan publication, a year later, 1975. And the author who reported this version to the Green Egg claims to have known the original author, her grandmother, Adriana Porter. This author is called Lady Gwen Thompson, and she claimed that this long version was originally what she found among sheafs of paper that were left to her from her grandmother's teachings. And the issue with that claim is that while the writing style and the references do seem to fit the lifestyle of Adriana Porter, and her writing matches, like the works of other rhymed couplets that you find throughout the 19th century, and Middle English grammar rules are generally right. There are terms within the Rede which really likely did not exist at the times Adriana Porter was alive, like Wicca and Threefold Law. Wicca is like a term that was not used until Gerald Gardner started using it and popularizing it in the early 1900s. So, while it's likely that some of the stanzas were written by a much older source, some were probably written by Thompson herself. And for this reason, the origin of the Threefold Law isn't likely as old as some people claim it to be, and it's honestly not 100% sure where it comes from. Some say that the additional verses and terms come from Doreen Valiant, and she's regarded as like the mother of Wicca and modern witchcraft, who supposedly presented these things in a speech in 1964, but the contents of that speech were not recorded or are not public knowledge, and much of what was said there wasn't published at all until her book, Witchcraft for Tomorrow, which was 1978. So, without knowing where these words come from, and without knowing exactly where the Threefold Law comes from, let's just take a look at some of these different phrasings and then dissect them to try to determine, what does the Threefold Law really mean? So the original phrasing found in the Green Egg is, mind the threefold law you should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. And that's not an and, that's 3 times bad and, A-N, as in the archaic form of if, or it follows that. Okay, that's an old term that's not in use today in modern English. So this was then reworded and republished by many authors in the subsequent years, and there's honestly no one source to credit because there's a lot of different ways of phrasing it, and nobody knows who the original author of this form was. But it basically reads, and it harm none, do as ye will, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3. So that's the one that most people who have looked up the Rede and studied this are probably familiar with. And we discussed the Wiccan Rede a lot more in episode 9 of this series, so if you're interested in all of this stuff, then go check out that, because I dissect the whole Rede. But here we're just going to focus on, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3, or this idea of 3 times bad and 3 times good. Like I said, in archaic English, the conjunction "and" is not a shortened version of "and," as many believe. It actually means if. Or so then it follows. Okay, so what this original statement is actually saying is that the Threefold Law, when 3 times bad happens, so it should be followed by 3 times good, which is actually very similar to the original idea of karma. The original idea of karma, which I believe comes out of India, is not actually about you get what you get. Okay, or you get what you give out. It's more about what you should give based on what you get, kind of like a pay it forward sort of deal. If you get something bad, you turn it into something good, and if you get something good, then you give that goodness back by 3 times. And this is how you gain good karma, which then enables you to reincarnate into desired forms in the future, right? So that's what allows you to have happy life in your future lives, is gaining this good karma. So it's more of like an idea of duty and what you should do. Now, the idea that people get what they reap, that people reap what they sow, I think that's the expression. That's a common one, and that's sort of like a reverse interpretation of this original idea, and it also is very common in India and other parts of the world as well. It's not just like Americans heard this idea of karma and then just ruined it, okay, like some people say. It's just like this is how people interpret it throughout the ages. And so now people are saying that, you know, people get badness if they do badness and goodness if they do goodness. And sometimes that returns even in the same lifetime, which can be a comforting notion. It's easy to let things go when you can say to yourself, well, they're going to get what's coming to them. Okay. So within Wicca, this is a very common interpretation of the rule of three, or the threefold law. The idea is that the Rede says, and it harm none, do as I will. So if it harms no one, then do as you will, and there's no rules, as long as no one gets hurt, unless it is in self-defense, right? So lest in self-defense it be, then all you have to do is mind the rule of three, as in go ahead and protect yourself, even if it means harming another person, but remember that whatever you sow, you will reap threefold. So this idea is tied to the notion that when you do an act of any kind, be it physical, like punching someone, emotional, like lashing out and hurting someone with words, or spiritual, so like praying that harm be done upon someone, that this will all come back to you 3 times, okay? It's not as if it will come back 3 times as strongly in one dimension here. So if you go out and punch someone in the face, no one is going to come along and punch you 3 times as hard, okay? That would be like a ridiculous notion. I mean, maybe they will, but probably that's not going to be what happens, right? So what we are really talking about here is kind of like a Newton's laws of motion, for those who know the physics of energy, right? So for every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction. What you put out into the world will come back to you just as strongly. However, there is no way to only act in one of these dimensions. As witches, we are all about aligning our physical, spiritual, and emotional selves. That's the purpose of magic, okay? So when you do a physical act or an emotional act, you are acting on all 3 levels, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. Assuming that you are perfectly aligned and in tune with yourself and your gods, then this will always be true. So the energy that you get back will match what you put out exactly. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction to equal, okay? But it will come on all 3 levels because the action you put out, even if it seems to be just physical or just emotional, is on all 3 levels. So this is why many Wiccans feel that even in self-defense, they should try not to cause needless harm. And yes, your life and well-being are important in Wicca. And you have to prioritize these things highly to ensure that you aren't getting hurt. And that is the theme of empowerment. So, you know, protect yourself. But you also want to minimize the damage that you do in the process. So that's one interpretation of the threefold law. Do what you must in self-defense, but try not to cause needless harm, okay? Lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3. Simple enough. Now, it gets cool, okay? So, in the original text about witchcraft written by Gardner, there is this theme of causing harm to initiates. Nothing that they can't handle, but he says that you do it because to suffer is to learn and grow, and any witch who want to learn the mysteries, any witch, okay, which witch is which, must be prepared to suffer and grow, or to suffer in order to learn and grow through witchcraft and through the mysteries. So he says that salt water purifies the body, and the scourge, or a ritual beating or whipping tool, that purifies the soul. Specifically, in his book, High Magic's Aid, one of the first books published with actual rituals in it. And this was a fictional book because publishing books on witchcraft was still kind of illegal at this time. I don't know if it was actually legal or just super taboo. I can't remember exactly when the laws against witchcraft were repealed in England. But anyway, so one of the characters in this book is a high priestess, and she scourges the new initiates to the craft. And she has a quote where she says something like, "This is the joke in witchcraft. The witch knows, though the initiate does not, that she will get 3 times what she gave, so she does not strike hard." And she means that literally. Okay, so in this book, in the ritual, she does like 4 rounds of various amounts. I think it's 3, 7, 9, and 21. That sounds right. So then later, the initiate in the ritual, or actually, I guess that's the first ritual, and then she does another ritual where she gets someone to 2nd degree, and then that person turns around within that ritual and beats her 9, 21, 27, and 63. Okay, so 3 times as many as each of those. Yes, that's 3 times. Okay, my math is good. So for those curious, this is chapter 17, I believe, in High Magic's Aid. It's on our, I think this chapter is on the reading list for the course. And it's definitely worth a read, High Magic's Aid, even though it's fiction. It's a lot better than his nonfiction, which tends to be really rambly. I love Gardner, but he's not as good a writer as he thinks he is. But his fiction is actually pretty good. It has difficult language because he wrote it like using like accurate Middle English terms, but it's definitely worth a read. So I'd sit down and read that sometime. Anyway, so in this book, we can see the theme that Gardner, the founder of Wicca, essentially is saying that the witch gives back 3 times what he or she receives in an effort to be a witch. So for this reason, there are a lot of Wiccans who take the rule of 3 to mean that anytime someone does something bad to you, it is your obligation to return that hurt 3-fold onto them. So this changes the way you read the Wiccan Rede altogether, right? Lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3. So by this logic, we're saying when acting in self-defense, hurt the offender with 3 times the effort or hurt that they attempted to hurt you with. So that's kind of like stating, you know, revenge is okay if someone wrongs you, basically. And a lot of people within Wicca do believe this. Okay, so we can take this a bit farther and say that you should return kindness 3-fold as well. But that isn't what the Rede says in this interpretation. So the Rede says, "And it harm none, do as ye will, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3. Okay, now there's a comma between that, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3. So some type it with that comma, and some don't. And some are basically saying, lest in self-defense it be, ever mind the rule of 3 when you're doing self-defense. And some put a comma or a semicolon in there saying, you know, and it harm none, do as thy will, lest in self-defense it be, and thought, and then ever mind the rule of 3. And those folks tend to interpret it as both giving back goodness and harm 3-fold to whoever sends goodness or harm your way. Okay, so some omit that comma, some don't, some turn it into a semicolon, and that completely changes the meaning of the Rede. So, you know, it's very interesting little differences, and commas can make a lot of difference in English. So that's a very interesting little tidbit there. So now, if we look back at the original phrasing from the green egg, mind the 3-fold law ye should, 3 times bad and 3 times good. So this doesn't really help us resolve things and determine which it is. This is essentially just stating that you should mind the 3-fold law. And now, again, though, if you interpret this to say 3 times bad follows 3 times good, then in this case, you'll take the later Rede in a similar vein. You'll take that to mean that when given negativity, the appropriate response is to turn that into positivity and to not take revenge. And 3 times bad, 3 times bad and 3 times good. So if 3 times bad, then it follows to turn that into 3 times good. Kind of like if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. So that's personally how I interpret things. You know, I try not to harm anyone needlessly, but sometimes harm is what people need. And in those cases, I do what I must do to try and help them get on a better path for their own growth. Or if someone is attacking me or my pack, well, maybe I will do harm if I have to get them to go away. Largely because I'm a chaos magician, I cheat and use chaos magic, and that just essentially amplifies someone's own karma. So I just like increase the amount of chaos in their life, and then if they react well to that, then they'll be fine. And if that makes them angry and upset and start to do more and more terrible and chaotic things, then the universe will just come along and like smite them, basically. So it'd be like the equivalent of praying, but if you believe in chaos over ordered deity like I do, then it works a little differently. It's technically still a way to cause harm, and it should be used sparingly, and I do use it sparingly, but generally it's like, it's not quite like revenge. It's more like justice. It's like, if this person really is as bad as I think they are, then they're going to get what's coming to them, and I'm going to make sure of it. They're going to get it now, not in their future lifetimes. Okay. So we should probably do what we must to try to keep people safe and to foster an atmosphere of inclusivity and acceptance, which does mean not tolerating the intolerant, okay? But that doesn't mean that we have to wish harm onto these people. Instead, I would do what I could to further the truth and the light, and just hope that these efforts are enough to overshadow the dark influence which others seek to place on the world. So that's my interpretation. That's the threefold law for you. So whether you believe that it is your duty to lash out at those who seek to harm others, or that you should do everything in your power to prevent the spread of needless harm, even when acting in self-defense, or whether you wish to return positive blessings in your life threefold to the world, or convert the negative things you receive into blessings, and then send those out threefold, all of that is up to you, and all of these interpretations are Wiccan. So find the meaning behind these words that makes you feel good about your practice, that makes the most sense to you, and then swear it. Swear it before your gods or whatever it is you believe in. This way you can live up to your own moral standards and carry forth love and light in the most productive way for you. And that's what matters. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. From all of us here at the Covenant of the Open Mind, blessed be.